Short is the story, long is the life.
Wukong's archive presents China Urban Legends, the Zijingshan Park of Zhengzhou. The first time I heard that something was off about Zijingshan Park was in the autumn of 2019. The person who told me was named Sun Jianjun. He was from Zhengzhou, Hunan, and had been driving a taxi in Zhengzhou for over a decade. When he told me this story, his cab was stopped under the Zijingshan overpass waiting for a red light. He pointed to the dark, dense shadow of trees on the east side and said, "That park, I never go in at night." Zijingshan Park sits right in the heart of Zhengzhou, at the southeast corner of the intersection of Jinshui Road and Zijingshan Road. Calling it a mountain is generous, it's really just a big dirt mound, about 20 meters high, covering roughly 180,000 square meters. You can find it easily on Baidu Maps. But if you ask an old-time Zhengzhou local what stories Zijingshan Park has, they'll most likely pause for a moment, then tell you, that place isn't peaceful at night. The park isn't famous nationwide, but everyone in Zhengzhou knows it. It's one of the city's oldest parks, built in the 1950s, along with Bishigang Park and People's Park, known as the three classic old parks of Zhengzhou. By day, it's bustling beyond belief, old folks singing Hunan opera and playing eru in pavilions along the Jinshui River, middle-aged people pushing strollers along the bamboo-lined paths in the East Garden, young couples taking kids on the carousel in the amusement area, lovers strolling under the willow trees by the lake, and square dancing groups staking out their spots from 4 in the afternoon, with speakers blaring. This area straddles the border of Jinshui District and Guanqing District. To the east is the Zhengdong New District, to the west is the Urki Commercial Hub, and to the north are the Provincial Party Committee and Military District compounds. You could say Zijingshan is one of Zhengzhou's busiest districts. The traffic at the intersection of Jinshui and Zijingshan never stops flowing. But there's a saying passed around among old Zhengzhou locals, once night falls, it's best not to enter Zijingshan Park.
I first heard this in September 2019, when I came to Zhengzhou for an interview. The interview topic had nothing to do with ghost stories. I was there to compile an oral history of Zhengzhou's urban transformation. While flipping through old files at the provincial archives, I happened to notice some records about Zijingshan, and following those leads, I uncovered a chain of things that sent chills down my spine.
Old Sun told me about one incident. In the summer of 2017, he picked up a female passenger who wanted to go to the east gate of Zijingshan Park. She looked about 30, wearing a white dress with a floral pattern, carrying a canvas bag. She said she was on a business trip in Zhengzhou, staying at the Hunan Hotel on Jinshui Road, and wanted to take a walk since she had nothing to do at night. She got out, walked a few steps toward the east gate, then came back and knocked on his window. She asked the driver, "Is this park open at night?" Old Sun checked his watch, 10:20 p.m. He said, "Yes, it's open." Zijingshan Park is an open park, no main gates, you can enter from any direction. But he felt he should say something. He told her, "Miss, there won't be many people in the park at night. Be careful going in alone." She smiled, said thanks, and turned away. Old Sun said that night he should have just gone home after finishing his shift. But something bothered him. He parked across the street on Jinshui Road, lit a cigarette, and watched the direction of the east gate. After about 20 minutes, the female passenger hadn't come out. Another 10 minutes passed, still no sign. When Old Sun got to this part of the story, he rubbed his hands together. I thought about calling her at the time. I'd memorized the last digits of her phone number when she got out, but then I figured, she's an adult, what's wrong with her taking a walk in the park? Why should I, a grown man, worry for nothing? I smoked another cigarette. By the time it was almost 11, she still hadn't come out. I decided to go in and look. Old Sun locked his cab and entered the park through the east gate. He said he regretted it as soon as he stepped inside. The lights in Zijingshan Park at night aren't very bright, old-fashioned courtyard lights every 20 meters or so, giving off a dim yellow glow that made faces look like they were covered in old newspaper. The trees in the park are dense and tall. Zijingshan is called that because the hill is covered with bauhinia flowers. In spring the whole hill is purple blossoms, beautiful, but by summer and autumn the branches and leaves have gone wild, blocking out the sky completely. The light from the lamps filters through the leaves, shattering into patches on the ground. When the wind blows, those patches flicker and shift, so you keep thinking something moved in the grass. Old Sun followed the main path toward the Zhengzhou River. When he passed by Zijing Tower, a two-story imitation antique pavilion built on the top of the hill, he looked up. The upstairs was pitch black, only the pillars on the second-floor balcony glowed a pale gray under the moonlight. Old Sun said he had a vague feeling that someone was up there on the second floor. Not standing on the balcony, but inside the second floor, back against the wall, face toward the window, completely still. But he wasn't sure if his eyes were playing tricks on him. The moment he looked, that spot was dark, he blinked and looked again, and in the window there seemed to be a darker shadow, almost merging with the wall's own color. If he hadn't stared hard for several seconds, he wouldn't have noticed the outline. He stopped. Called out, "Anyone up there?" No answer. Called again, still no answer. He figured he was probably imagining things and kept walking. When he reached the bank of the Zhengzhou River, he saw the female passenger. She was standing by the river, facing the water, motionless. The Zhengzhou River through this section of Zijingshan Park is about a dozen meters wide. Not deep, but the water is always green and murky, covered in duckweed and fallen leaves. On the opposite bank is the other half of the park, formerly called the East Garden, now merged with the West Garden, where the trees are even denser and the lights dimmer, almost a solid block of black. The woman was standing right at the water's edge, as if looking at something. Old Sun shouted, "Hey, miss." She didn't react. He called again, still no movement. He walked closer, until he was about 2 or 3 meters behind her. That's when he noticed something. Although she was standing by the river, there was no shadow in front of her. There were streetlights on both banks of the Zhengzhou River. Even if the light was weak, if someone stands between the lamp and the water, their reflection should appear on the water's surface. But there was nothing on the river. Only the lamplight and the distant city lights flickered slightly on the water. The woman's reflection was gone. Old Sun later said that when he saw that, his brain went blank. He opened his mouth to say something, but his throat felt blocked, nothing came out. He backed away step by step, retreating into the bushes by the path. He stood there for about 5 minutes, legs trembling. When he looked up again, the woman by the river was gone, the one in the white floral dress had vanished. He wasn't sure when she'd left or which way she'd gone. All he knew was that from the moment he noticed she had no reflection to the moment he looked up again, less than 2 minutes had passed. There was no way a living person could leave that riverbank in 2 minutes without making a sound. The area was covered in grass and gravel paths. Anyone walking would have made noise. After that, Old Sun never entered Zijingshan Park at night again.
At first, I took Sun Jianjun's story as just another urban legend. Taxi drivers love telling those tales. Every Zhengzhou night shift driver has a few stories up their sleeve. But later, when I was going through files at the provincial archives, I found something that made me reconsider. The files I was sorting were Zhengzhou city construction archives from the 1950s to the 1980s, including urban planning maps, infrastructure approval documents, demolition survey reports, and some scattered internal memos. The entry for Zijingshan Park appeared several times in the 1951 construction files. A report from April 1951 contained a passage, quoted verbatim, The Zijingshan area is planned to be developed as a public park. The site currently contains scattered graves, all of which were relocated by the end of last year. After removing the graves, at a depth of approximately 3 meters below the surface, a large number of superimposed skeletal remains were discovered. Preliminary assessment indicates they were formed in different periods. The upper layer dates from the Republic of China era, while the lower layer yielded fragmented bones judged to be much older. This has been turned over to the Municipal Public Security Bureau and Health Bureau for joint handling. That passage reads very matter-of-factly, but if you read carefully, a few points stand out. First, scattered graves. Before it became a park, Zijingshan was originally a burial ground. Second, large number of superimposed skeletal remains, meaning beneath the graves there was an even earlier, larger burial layer, with many skeletons stacked on top of each other. Third, different periods. The site was repeatedly used for burying the dead over a long span, from the Ming and Qing dynasties through the Republican era. I later went to see an old-timer at the Zhengzhou Local Chronicle's office. His surname was Chun. He'd worked there for over 30 years and knew the city's old history inside and out. When he heard me ask about Zijingshan, he was silent for a moment, closed his office door, and told me what follows. He said that Zijingshan had been troubled even in the Qing dynasty. Its location, the current Zijingshan Park plus the area around the Provincial People's Hall, was a mass burial ground outside Zhengzhou city in the late Qing. During the Qing, Zhengzhou was just a small county seat. It only started to develop after the Beijing-Hankow Railway opened in 1906. At that time, outside the old city there were vast stretches of wasteland and dirt slopes, with Zijingshan being the largest hill. Poor families who couldn't afford coffins or burial plots would wrap their dead in straw mats or nail together thin wooden boxes, carry them up to Zijingshan, and bury them. Those even poorer didn't even have mats. They'd just place the body on the ground, cover it with a few shovelfuls of earth, and call it done. Over time, the soil in that area was practically filled with bones. By the Republican era, Feng Yuxiang was governing Hunan and implementing reforms, including urban renewal in Zhengzhou. In 1927, the Zhengzhou Municipal Preparatory Office ordered the clearing of the mass burial ground on Zijingshan, planning to build a martyrs' cemetery there. But because of the turbulent times that followed, the Central Plains War, the Japanese invasion, the plan fell through. Part of the graves were leveled, but more were overgrown with weeds and gradually became invisible. After the Huayuanca Dike breach in 1938, a huge number of refugees from the flooded Yellow River region poured into Zhengzhou. Many died on the road, starvation, drowning, plague. The city was small and had no way to handle so many corpses. The municipal authorities dug several large pits near Zijingshan and buried the unclaimed bodies in mass graves. According to a Republican-era document Chan had seen, between autumn 1938 and early 1939, no fewer than 300 refugee bodies were buried in the Zijingshan area alone. No coffins, no shrouds, just dumped into the pits, a layer of quicklime, then a layer of earth, then the next batch. That method is called a mass burial pit. Layer upon layer of bodies and soil, so a 3-meter-deep pit could hold several layers. The situation in 1942 during the Great Hunan Famine was even worse. That year, 3 million people starved to death across Hunan province. Zhengzhou was one of the hardest-hit areas. Refugees flooded into the city from all directions, and too many died in the streets. The city government was utterly incapable of handling so many corpses. By the end, there weren't even enough coffins, mats, or people to dig graves. Bodies were carted out of the city by the truckload and dumped wherever convenient. Because the Zijingshan area had already been used for so many burials, the soil was loose from constant digging and filling, until it became a land almost kneaded with human bones. Dig a meter down anywhere, and you'd almost certainly hit something. A line from the municipal records of the time struck me. Since the onset of winter, between 30 and 50 corpses are collected daily. It is no longer possible to register them individually. They are all transported to the Zijingshan area northeast of the city for burial. That means for years, dozens of unclaimed bodies were hauled to Zijingshan every day and dumped into pre-dug pits. Not buried one by one, but dozens in a layer covered with earth, then another layer of dozens. That triple-layer burial was exactly what was uncovered during construction in 1951. The construction team's report said, "Large number of superimposed skeletal remains." Superimposed. That's the meaning. Chun said that most of those buried people didn't even leave names behind. They were just a tiny fraction of the 3 million who died in that famine, carted to the slopes of Zijingshan, dumped into pre-dug pits, covered with earth and forgotten. A year later, the slopes were overgrown with weeds and shrubs. Later, a park was built there, with flowers planted, pavilions and terraces constructed. Everything was buried beneath the roots of the bauhinia trees.
At the beginning of 2020, something happened that brought the nighttime tales of Zijingshan Park back onto people's lips in Zhengzhou. That January, Zhengzhou had several days of heavy snow. On the night of the heaviest snowfall, the Zijingshan police station received an alarm call. The caller was a man in his 40s, surnamed Zhao, living in a residential building on the southeast corner of the park. He said he lived on the top floor, the 7th, and his bedroom window faced the park and the Jinshui River. Around midnight, he was getting ready for bed and glanced out the window. He wanted to make sure it was shut tight because of the cold. Then he saw something. He said there were footprints in the snow in the park. Footprints made by a person. They came from the direction of the east gate, led all the way to the water's edge platform by the Jinshui River, and stopped there. There were no footprints leading back. Only footprints going in, none coming out. Mr. Zhao said his first thought was that someone had fallen into the water. He called 110 immediately. Police arrived at the scene within 5 minutes. 3 officers, with flashlights and defensive equipment, entered from the east gate and followed the footprints. The snow was heavy, and the footprints were clear, the prints of an adult, roughly size 42 or 43, with even strides, indicating the person was walking at a normal pace, not fleeing or in panic. The footprints extended all the way to the edge of the water platform, and then vanished. The water platform is a concrete slab about 4 square meters, about 30 centimeters above the water. A thick layer of snow had accumulated on it, but that snow was undisturbed, no footprints at all. In other words, after reaching the platform's edge, the person had simply disappeared, no signs of jumping, no struggle, no trace of turning back. The footprints ended abruptly at the platform's edge. The officer on duty recorded the situation honestly. They used flashlights to search the river surface, no signs of broken ice, the water was frozen solid. They walked along the bank several times, confirming that for hundreds of meters in either direction, there were no other footprints. The team leader was a veteran officer with over 20 years on the force, surnamed Hu. He later said to a colleague, "I've been on the job more than 20 years and solved plenty of cases, but footprints that vanish at the water's edge? First time I've seen it. I don't believe in things science can't explain, but I don't go around spreading rumors either." The incident was eventually recorded as suspected missing person, no abnormalities found at scene. But word got out anyway. That platform by the Jinshui River had already been associated with some strange tales. People said that in the early morning hours, you could see a figure standing on the river, dressed in plain clothes, facing north, completely still. They said the figure had its back to the shore, and if you stared at it, it would slowly turn around, but when it was halfway, you wouldn't want to look anymore. This story ended up on local Zhengzhou forums. One netizen said his family lived in the neighborhood next to the park. His father worked as a security guard at the park and had done the night shift for 7 or 8 years. He'd told several versions. His father said that every winter after a snowfall, someone would report seeing footprints vanishing by the river. But every year, the result was the same. The footprints ended at the water's edge, and no one was ever found. I started seriously investigating Zijingshan Park in the spring of 2020. Through a friend who worked in the Zhengzhou Public Security Bureau, I obtained the records of nighttime incidents reported in and around the park from 2015 to 2019. Most were routine fights, drunken disturbances, lost property. But a few entries struck me as unusual. In July 2016, in the early hours, someone reported seeing a figure moving on the second floor of Zijingshan Tower. Police arrived and searched the whole pavilion, top to bottom. Both floors were locked that day, and no one was found. But the caller insisted he had clearly seen a person standing at the second floor window, face pressed against the glass, looking down for a long time. The caller was the owner of a late-night food stall near the park, who saw it while passing by after closing up. He said it wasn't the first time he'd seen it. Twice before, at about the same time and same spot, he'd seen something similar. But he hadn't called the police before because he thought his eyes might be playing tricks. In September 2017, a young man who liked to run in the park at night reported that while running along the path by the Zhengzhou River, he heard footsteps following him. The footsteps were clear, the click-clack of leather shoes on the stone path. When he stopped, they stopped. When he walked, they followed. But every time he turned around, there was no one behind him. He eventually got so scared he ran all the way to the underside of the Zijingshan overpass, crouched under a streetlight gasping for breath, and only dared to look back after a while. He later told the police that the path was lined with bushes and low trees. If someone wanted to hide, they wouldn't have been able to run far, but every time he looked back, the path ahead and behind was empty. In November 2018, winter had set in, and the lake in the park was covered in a thin layer of ice. A sanitation worker was sweeping near the southwest corner of the park around 4 a.m. when he saw someone walking on the lake, not walking from the shore, but standing in the middle of the lake. He was so frightened he pushed his garbage cart and ran. When police later checked, the ice was less than a centimeter thick, nowhere near enough to support a person's weight, and there were no footprints on the ice. After reading these records, I already had a rough idea. The nighttime anomalies at Zijingshan Park weren't random paranormal events. They were roots planted from the very year the park was built. Those remains, those bones that were cleared away and then forgotten in place, had never left this land.
But what really sent chills down my spine was something else I saw later, the original design drawings of Zijingshan Park from 1951. Those design drawings were obtained from the Zhengzhou City Construction Archives. They were large, a zero-size, yellowed tracing paper, edges already crumbled into jagged teeth. The design notes at the bottom were written in small brush script. Overall planning map of Zhengzhou Zijingshan Park, March 1951. Signed by the then Zhengzhou Construction Bureau and an engineer surnamed Huang.
I spent an afternoon studying this map. For its time, the layout of Zijingshan Park was ambitious: an artificial lake, pavilions, rockeries, flower beds, a children's play area, all quite comprehensive. The park's north-south axis roughly ran down the middle, with the main north gate facing Zhengzhou Road and the south end extending near Chengdong Road. The east and west gardens were split by the Zhengzhou River, with two small bridges connecting the banks. In the southeast corner, a small zoo was planned but never built. But one design detail made me think all my earlier conclusions might not have gone far enough.
There were 3 wells inside Zijingshan Park. They were distributed in different spots, one on the slope behind Zijingshan Tower, one in the bamboo grove at the northeast corner of the East Garden, and one in the back courtyard of the Park Management Office. These 3 wells were clearly marked on the original 1951 design drawing. The symbol was a set of concentric circles drawn in ink, with tiny characters next to them reading, "Ancient Well." But I had never seen any markings for these 3 wells on current maps of Zijingshan Park. I called the park management office and asked if there were any ancient wells on the grounds. The person who answered said there were none. They'd never seen any wells.
Later, I went to the site again. I took a copy of the design drawing and searched for each well. The location of the well behind Zijing Tower was now a flower bed planted with roses and petunias. I found the spot for the second well in the bamboo grove. There was a public toilet built on it. The third well, in the backyard of the office area, I couldn't enter because the office area is off limits to visitors. I stood by the flower bed behind Zijing Tower, thinking about the well marked on the drawing, about 1 meter in diameter, depth unknown. Based on the scale of the drawing, the well rim was about 1.2 meters across. I looked at the surroundings. The slope behind Zijing Tower was the highest point in the park. Logically, digging a well at the top of a slope would yield very little water. Yet this well was placed exactly there. I asked a park gardener when this flower bed was built. He said he didn't remember, it was already there when he started. He added, the flowers in this bed never grow well. Whatever we plant dies. We've changed the soil 3 or 4 times, but it's still the same.
I didn't say anything at the time, but I thought to myself, before the park was built in 1951, what else was on Zijingshan besides graves? Were all those cleared remains really completely removed? Or was some of it just backfilled underground, covered with a layer of soil, and then pavilions and flower beds built on top?
The trail led me to a long-retired employee of the Zijingshan Park Management Office. His name was Ma Desheng. He was 73, originally from Zhengzhou County on the outskirts of Zhengzhou. In 1969, at 23, he took over his father's job in the park's gardening team. He worked there until he retired in 2005, 36 years at Zijingshan Park. I found him in a village on the outskirts of Zhengzhou. His house wasn't big, but the yard was neat and tidy, with a few pomegranate trees, and a pile of chopped firewood in the corner. His wife poured me tea, then sat at the door picking vegetables, occasionally glancing our way. Old Ma listened to my purpose, took a sip of tea, and was silent for a long time. Then he said something to me. I worked 36 years of landscaping at Zijingshan, planting trees, pruning, watering, spraying pesticide. Face to the soil, back to the sky. I've spent most of my life dealing with dirt. There are some things I've always wanted to tell someone. But if you say them, no one believes you. So eventually you stop talking.
He said that in his early years at Zijingshan, he heard a story from the old workers. In the summer of 1953, 2 years after the park opened, workers were planting trees on the slope behind Zijing Tower. When they dug a hole nearly 1 meter deep, one worker's shovel hit something with a clang. He thought it was a rock, but when he crouched down and brushed away the dirt, it was a human skull. People were tough back then. They didn't think much of it. They picked the bones out, tossed them aside, and kept digging. But the second hole also hit something, and the third too. That entire slope, almost every meter or two, had a human skeleton. Some were only a few dozen centimeters deep, others over 2 meters. Men, women, old, young. Some bones weren't arranged like natural burials. Hands tied behind the back, skulls shattered, clearly from violent blows suffered while alive. The work supervisor reported it to management. The leadership's instructions were, don't make a fuss, dig them all up, pack them in sacks, and haul them away.
Old Ma said he later asked where those bones ended up. They were taken to a wasteland on the eastern outskirts of Zhengzhou. A big pit was dug, all the bones were dumped in, and the pit was filled with earth. That spot now has buildings on it, apparently a residential complex near the intersection of Longhai Road and Weilai Road. Nobody can find those bones anymore. He said the driver who hauled them later told him it took 5 truckloads. 5 truckloads of bones. The driver said he'd been hauling freight for 5 years, but he'd never seen anything like that. The sacks were stacked over 2 meters high, and black liquid seeped from the bags, dripping down the truck bed all the way to the east outskirts. He couldn't eat for days afterward. Later, that driver never took the eastbound route again. Whenever someone needed to go in that direction, he would find an excuse to refuse. But Old Ma said one thing kept bothering him: the 3 wells in the park.
He said when he first started at the park, the well behind Zijing Tower was still sealed, covered with a circular bluestone slab about a meter in diameter, thick with moss, clearly untouched for many years. In 1967, during the most violent period of the Cultural Revolution's factional fighting, the 2 sides in Zhengzhou clashed heavily in Zijingshan Park, leaving several dead. The park's rebel faction occupied the park as a stronghold and opened that well, pushing the bluestone slab aside. Whatever was in the well didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that from then on, that well was never sealed again. The mouth stayed open like a black hole, gaping at the sky. Later, in the early 1970s, the park carried out a landscape renovation and backfilled the well, planting trees and flowers on top. But Old Ma said he was there when they filled it. In the backfill soil there were bones. Not complete skeletons but fragments. Tiny, fragmented bone pieces stained with rust-colored dirt, mixed in the yellow earth. He was young then, didn't dare ask questions. But he'd seen too many bones in his 36 years of gardening to mistake them. Those were human bones. Old Ma also experienced something in 2001. That spring, the park was doing renovations. At the northeast corner of the East Garden Bamboo Grove, the location of the second well, workers were using an excavator to dig a foundation when they uncovered a concrete slab at the edge of the bamboo grove. The slab was about 80 centimeters square, 12 or 13 centimeters thick, rough surface, uneven edges, as if it had been poured casually. Several workers used crowbars to pry the slab up. Beneath it was a hole about 80 centimeters square, around 3 meters deep. The workers shone a flashlight down. It was pitch black inside, with accumulated water at the bottom and some scattered bricks and rubble. But everyone noticed something. The inner walls of that hole were covered with scratch marks made by fingers.
Old Ma said he went to look. He crouched at the opening and stared down for a long time. He said those scratch marks weren't made by tools. They were the marks of fingernails repeatedly raking across damp earth. Some were deep, gouging off layers of hard soil. He'd worked in landscaping for decades and could instantly tell the difference between marks left by plant roots and those made by human hands. Those scratches were made by human fingernails.
He said, a 3-meter deep hole, the mouth sealed with a concrete slab, total darkness inside. If someone fell in, they would keep clawing at the walls, keep clawing until their nails broke, bled, disappeared, until they had no strength left. Then they would slowly seep into the wall, become part of that darkness. I asked him, what did you do about it? Old Ma said, the foreman said, don't look anymore. Cover it. They put the concrete slab back, poured a layer of concrete on top, and then laid the foundation for the public toilet. Later, the public toilet was built, and it's still in use. I asked, does the toilet function normally? Old Ma glanced at me and said, how did you know? After the toilet was built, every few days visitors complained about strange sounds inside. Not the regular noise of pipes, it sounded like someone in the next stall was scraping the wall with their fingernails, non-stop.
Before I left Zhengzhou, I visited Zijingshan Park one more time. This time it was during the day. Saturday afternoon, bright sun, the park was packed with people. Old folks doing Tai Chi in the open space in front of Zijing Tower, children lining up for the little train in the amusement area, young couples spreading picnic blankets on the lawn by the Jinshui River, eating snacks in the sun. Not far away, the square dance speakers were already testing. Everything seemed so normal. Sunlight sparkled on the Jinshui River's surface. A few kids leaned on the railing watching fish. No one could imagine what had once been buried in the soil beneath their feet. I walked the entire main path. From Zijing Tower to the bamboo grove in the East Garden, then to the water platform by the Jinshui River. The second-floor windows of Zijing Tower were closed, curtains drawn. The public toilet in the bamboo grove was spotless, the smell of disinfectant in the air. The water platform had been refitted with new anti-slip tiles, and a blue towel someone had forgotten was drying in the sun. Everything that had sent chills down my spine had been smoothed over by time. I stood at the spot where Old Sun had stood, by the Jinshui River, facing the water. The afternoon light came from the west, and my shadow fell clearly on the water, swaying gently with the ripples. I imagined, if one day you stood here, looked down at the water, and your shadow was gone, what would you do? I wasn't sure if I would, like Old Sun, back away step by step into the bushes, then turn and run within 2 minutes.
I later called Teacher Chan and asked him a question. Who had originally dug those 3 wells? Why were they specifically marked on the 1951 park design drawings but then left out of every subsequent park map? Chen thought for a long time, then said he wasn't sure. But he told me one thing. The Zijingshan site wasn't originally a mass burial ground. That came later. Before that, there was a village there. It had existed since the Ming dynasty. What the village was called, no one remembered. But one thing was certain. That village was slaughtered at the end of the Ming and beginning of the Qing. When Li Zicheng's army swept through Hunan, there were several fierce battles near Zhengzhou. The village was wiped out, everyone dead. Later, the area gradually became a graveyard. Those wells might have been left from that village.
I said, you mean there could be something in those wells?
Chun said, I'm not sure. But consider this, when the park was built in 1951, the construction crew unearthed a large number of human bones. Those bones were later buried together somewhere in the eastern outskirts. But there are no archival records about the depth or contents of the old wells at Zijingshan, because during construction, on all the design drawings, they were marked as abandoned ancient wells, sealed and filled. Nobody ever opened them to see what was inside.
So we might never know how deep those wells go, or what lies at the bottom.
Chin said one last thing. Do you know why ancient people dug wells in villages? Not just for water. There's another reason. Wells were believed to be passages to the underworld. That's why Chinese folk tradition has a taboo. Abandoned wells must not be casually filled in, because filling them would block that passage. Things that couldn't get out would be trapped forever.
This happened 2 months after I finished writing the above. In the autumn of 2020, the Zhengzhou city government carried out a comprehensive landscape upgrade of Zijingshan Park. The scope was large, renovating all paths, upgrading the lighting system, dredging the Jinshui River, and building a new visitor service center on the site of the flower bed behind Zijing Tower.
In the 3rd week of construction, the excavator hit something hard about 2 meters below the flower bed. The workers thought it was bedrock, but when they got down to check, they found a semicircular object, about 1 meter in diameter, like a giant clay pot. They switched to manual digging, carefully clearing away the surrounding earth, and discovered it wasn't a pot, but the rim of a well. A well built of gray bricks, about 1.2 meters in diameter, the bricks covered with white efflorescence, some broken and collapsed. The mouth had no cover, or rather, the cover had fallen into the well at some point.
The construction crew called the police. Police arrived, lowered a searchlight on a rope into the well. It was about 6 meters deep, with silt and water at the bottom. They pumped the water out and found some things in the mud at the bottom, scattered fragments of bone, already turned brown. Initial forensic assessment indicated the bones were very old, possibly hundreds of years or more. But there were also newer marks on the well walls, relatively recent scratch marks. The police couldn't determine when those scratches were made or whose they were.
According to reports, the well was eventually backfilled, concrete poured on top, then brick paving and greenery laid over it. The new visitor service center was built on top of the filled area. That path is beautiful now. Cream-colored walls, large glass windows, 2 rows of bauhinia trees planted at the entrance, which will be covered in purple blossoms next spring. The head of the construction crew later said in an interview, "That well is nothing special. There are old wells like this all over Zhengzhou underground. Before liberation, lots of courtyards had wells. Then the city developed, the wells were filled in, buildings went up on top, normal." There's a follow-up to the well story that I didn't include. In the spring of 2021, a staff member at the Zijingshan Park Management Office, while sorting through old files, found a 1952 internal maintenance record. It said, "The well behind Zijing Tower, depth over 7 zhang, has a horizontal tunnel at the bottom, direction unknown, not explored." I looked it up, 7 zhang is about 23 meters. A domestic well wouldn't need to be dug 23 meters deep. And there would be no need for a horizontal tunnel at the bottom. Where that tunnel leads, no one knows. That record also mentioned one more thing. In April 1952, the construction crew poured 2 truckloads of quicklime into the well. The reason given was disinfection and epidemic prevention. But if it was just disinfection, why would they need 2 truckloads of quicklime? Enough to fill the entire well from bottom to top 3 times over? I always felt they weren't trying to disinfect. They were trying to permanently seal whatever was in that horizontal tunnel at the bottom.
He was right. It made perfect sense. But if you stand on the slope behind Zijing Tower and look into the park, that flower bed has now become the visitor service center. At night, when the landscape lights come on, the shadows of the bauhinia trees fall on the cream-colored walls. As the wind blows, those shadows tremble gently on the wall. Like countless hands, scratching the wall, one stroke at a time. I haven't been to Zijingshan Park since. But every time I pass the Zijingshan overpass, I glance in that direction. During the day, it's just an ordinary park, trees green, flowers red, old folks and children, bustling. But at night, when I'm in a taxi passing along Jinshui Road and look to the right, in that dark mass of tree shadows, occasionally a light appears. I know that light, it's the one on the porch of the Visitor Service Center. It stays on from 5 p.m. to 7 a.m. If you pass the Zijingshan overpass late at night and look down at that pitch-black park, you'll see a faint yellow light across the Jinshui River. That spot is where the well was filled in. I don't know what that light illuminates. But I do know one thing, beneath the ground we walk on, there are probably far more things buried than we can imagine. 3 months after I finished writing this story, in the summer of 2021, I received an unsigned email. The sender's address was a random string of characters I didn't recognize. The email contained only one sentence: "The public toilet on the north side of the bamboo grove in the east garden of Zijingshan Park was demolished in June 2021. Not because of renovation. Because every night, the surface of one wall seeped water stains. During the day they dried up, at night they came back. When the management office opened the wall, they found many nail fragments embedded in the mortar between the bricks. Some had calcified, turned grayish-white. Others were quite fresh, as if left there not long ago. The email had no signature, no attachments, no contact information. I tried to reply, but the mailbox didn't exist. I don't know who sent that email, or whether those fingernail fragments really existed. But that night, I had a dream. I dreamed I was standing at the entrance of that public toilet in the east garden of Zijingshan Park. The door was closed, and inside someone was scraping the wall with fingernails. Once, again, very rhythmic. I reached out to push the door, but it wouldn't budge. I pushed again, an odor seeped out through the crack. Not the smell of toilet disinfectant. It was a damp, moldy smell, like the air in a cellar that had held well water for too long. When I woke up, I couldn't get back to sleep. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe. New urban legend every day.